which is the world as it arises in the present. It's a matter of switching loyalty. And as long as we give our loyalty to the stories we tell ourselves, then we're subject to depression and elation and everything else. All the different emotional turmoils. And we become their slave, the slaves of these stories. These stories are very repetitive, that we tell ourselves. They vary a little bit time to time, but mostly they are more alike, each telling, than they are different. So, really, the path to enlightenment, if you want to call it that, actually, in the Buddhist tradition, the word is bodhi, which means awakening. It's been translated as enlightenment, but that's sort of a more Western term. And what we're awakening from is belief in the stories, these mythic stories that we tell ourselves, which are very deep, very deeply ingrained. Some of them we don't even notice that they're being told, but they're going on like in the background, conditioning the way in which we see the world, so that we don't see it accurately. We see it through the veil of preconception and judgment and past conditioning. This is what's meant by karma, by the way. Karma is that veil of past conditioning that determines what and how we see our lives as they unfold in the present and how we react to them. So, if you've had an angry parent, let's say an angry father, and you've grown up afraid of angry men, and you see somebody walking down the street who reminds you of your father, you might have a very negative reaction to that person even though you've never met them. And you might imagine all kinds of things, and think them, or sitting on the subway or wherever you are. And then you pass by that person and they're gone, and you have no idea who that person really was. Or maybe you meet them. How many times this happened to us, where you meet someone and you had a very negative impression. You thought they were going to be antipathetic. They were going to be a person who didn't like you and was going to be threatening. And then you meet them and they turned out to be your best friend. It's so confounding and wonderful when that happens. It's so liberating, because one is liberated from one's own prejudice. And that's really what the path is about, is becoming free in the deepest way from the patternings which rule our lives. So many things.
Pattern can't be avoided, right?
Well, we've got them, and we have to work with them and see them. And part of the thing is seeing them. That's why you don't try and get rid of thought. When you begin to notice your thoughts, you begin to see that you have particular patterns. And that can be kind of interesting. Alan, you?
I just wondered, where that question was coming from, whether you might have thought that being there has a certain value. And maybe you could say something about that.
Definitely. Well, that's exactly where it comes from. Because I think, in a way, the question was, why should we privilege reality over illusion? Because I like to be lost in a movie for 3 hours. I like to be in a rapture of love. I like to be fooled in a way. So I like to go to a concert and see the band and be lost in the sound. So, in a way, why should we privilege this reality that at times can be very disappointing and harsh and brutal and crude? I mean, at the bottom of it, why should we privilege reality over the dream?
Anybody want to respond? Yes. Yeah.
I think when we say here, it's not necessarily that, and how I understand it's not necessarily this is real. So first of all, because there's so many assumptions that we go through, like the sounds that we hear, we immediately give something a shape, a form, and we project kind of feeling, do I like it, do I not like it? There's all kinds of complexities, even if it's just very simple things. Sights, I mean, same thing. So there's so many assumptions. So the reason why you want to stay here in some sense, because you want to challenge the assumption. Is it really that difficult? You know, is it really that bad? Like, and you start seeing that as you meditate, for example, you start seeing, well, I just assume a lot of stuff, and it's actually not because the environment's bad, because, I don't know, it's something about myself. Like, I just can't take the space, the silence, and I can't deal with it. And therefore you start looking for an activity. So I think it's something along those lines.
Isabel?
And also, you know, as the same way as you can be lost in like a beautiful dream, you can be lost in hell with your thoughts. And unfortunately, most of the time, you know, we're not in that beautiful, you know, dream, but in a more negative space. So that is, you know, something to begin with. Is like, do I really want that? Do I want these, you know, circles of thoughts around, you know, negativity and, you know, suffering?
Alan?
Well, you were talking about how disappointing it is to be here compared to the rapture of love, and no, I understand that, but well, I think it would be. I mean, if those dreams were so enticing, which you described very well, but I think what makes this seem flat and disappointing being here is because they're not like the dream. You know, the dream is your own creation, and then you come back and it seems flat and like colorless, maybe. That reminds me of what Trungpa Rinpoche described. You know, the idea is that you can describe this flat, colorless, unexciting present as boring, you know, and Trungpa Rinpoche talked about boredom as being very important to make a friend with boredom, a friend with the experience of not demanding anything from the world. So he talked about the first wave of boredom is hot. It's hot because there's an irritation, nothing's happening. You know, nothing's happening. So let me get back to one of my juicy stories, you know, nothing's happening. And then if we can stay with that hot boredom, it becomes what he calls cool boredom. I mean, not like, this is really cool, but like the temperature of the irritation goes way down. And so we become more comfortable with, well, nothing's happening, but something's always happening, really. So it's like you give yourself a chance to explore. And then you never know.
I mean, ultimately, it gives more sensibility. Ultimately, I mean, I don't know ultimately, but it seems like this boredom, in a way, is a way to sharpen our sensibility, because we're used to extremes. So actually, a lot is happening in what we at first see as boredom. Actually, like, you know, John Cage would say, you know, that there's never silence. Like, there's no such thing as silence, because there's always something going on, and the texture is incredibly rich of that boredom, right? So in a way, it's like training your mind not to fall into those dreams, which could be in a form of intoxication, in a way. Yeah.
And those dreams, lead us away from seeing the world as it really is. We see them through the filters of the dreams. And they can even make us insensible. You know, how many times have you experienced or seen someone else lost in a terrifically anxious dream? They're worried about something really terrible. And another person might call their name and they don't even hear it because they're so lost in the dream, the thought. Well, that's extreme. But each one of us, as we walk down the street and you watch your mind and how often we're thinking, and having judgmental thoughts. Do I like the quality of this day? Do I like this neighborhood? That person who just passed me, you know? And we're making these judgmental, evaluative thoughts continuously. And it grays out the world as it really is. We don't quite see it as vibrantly and vividly because we're, to some extent, more or less lost in thought. I also think that, you know, I always think of that expression, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, he, she. You know. Well, if you put your loyalty in dream, sometimes the dreams will be pleasant, but sometimes they won't. And if your loyalty is to thinking, you really think thought is it, you've got to take the bad with the good. And even when it's good, even when it's a very pleasant dream, there's always that tinge of, will it last? You know? Is it quite good enough? And these are actually, these dreams are classed in Buddhist psychology in what are called the 6 realms. These are 6 sort of dream portraits, you might say. And they range from the most unpleasant is the hell realm. And the hell realm is a person who dreams that everywhere is threat. They see threat and danger and damage everywhere they look. And you've seen people like this walking down the street talking to themselves or even shouting. And sometimes a person like that can be kind of frightening. You know, you want to distance yourself from them because you don't know what they're going to do. They're out of control. They're living in a dream world, a very, very bad one. And then it goes all the way up, and there's 6 different portraits, all the way up to the sort of the most pleasant one at the other end of the spectrum, is what is called the God realm. And it's the realm of people who, instead of seeing threat and danger everywhere, they see beauty and pleasure everywhere they look. So everything they see is beautiful, everything they smell is perfume, and you know, hear is musical, and these are the gods. And they have very little appreciation for suffering of other people. Sort of the Marie Antoinette syndrome, you know, can't relate to suffering because they're so absorbed in pleasure. And then there are all different portraits in between. And all of these are dream states of dreaming, you know, and which we all experience. We experience the hell realm, each one of us, momentarily, you know, when you get really angry or frightened or freaked out, you know, by something. Or you might experience the God realm when somebody gives you a great gift or a compliment or lots of love or something really pleasurable. You're having this fabulous dinner and it just tastes amazing, you know, and suddenly you're in the God realm for a brief moment. We go through these realms. And what the path is really about is becoming free of being entrapped in those stories and waking up to the world as it arises very, very vividly all the time, telling us what it is. Everything is very powerful and has its own beauty and its own extraordinary vividness if we have the eyes to see. And that's why, you know, all these pictures on the wall, you know, in the Tibetan tradition, it's so colorful. You know, these tankas back here. Well, if we were in a real Tibetan temple, there wouldn't be a square inch that wasn't covered with some kind of color like that, right? You know what that's like. And this is a Western, pale Western version of it. And the reason is that it's because the world can be seen as so colorful and vivid and beautiful when we have the eyes to see. And that's really what meditation practice is, a rehearsal for that. It's a constant act of coming back from dreams. These dreams are so idiosyncratic and unique to our particular experience, individual experience. So I give an example that I heard somewhere once of a child who's walking down the street with his or her mother, and the mother is absorbed. She's window shopping, and the child sees a dog, and is excited. It's maybe a 2 or 3 year old child, and goes up to the dog, and the dog bites it. The dog's an aggressive dog, and this is a very traumatic experience for that child. And the mother rescues the child from the dog, and months go by, but this memory is stored in the child's unconscious. In Buddhist psychology, they call it the storehouse, the alaya. It's the storehouse of memory. It's stored there as a seed, meaning it's in potential. The child isn't thinking about the dog, most of the time, until one day, maybe a few months later, the child's walking down another street with his or her mother, and once again sees a dog. That memory comes to life, and the child sees this new dog through that veil of that memory and has a terrible reaction, frightened to death. This dog could bite it. The mother sees what's happening, contacts the owner of the dog, finds out the dog's a friendly dog, it's not aggressive, brokers a meeting between the child and this dog who licks its face and is friendly, wags its tail, jumps up and down. And now the child has learned a lesson that not all dogs are aggressive and bite. Some dogs are friendly and are friends. And that's stored in the unconscious, in the memory, in the storehouse. And now the third time the child meets a dog, it's going to have this qualified memory that some dogs bite, some dogs are friendly, might be cautious, it'll have a different reaction. We go through life like this, collecting tons and tons of experiences which then act as a filter in terms of the way we see the world. We see the world through these veils of habit and of conditioning. And really, what the path is about beginning to lift those veils. And the way we do it is by the practice we just did here, which is twofold. On the one hand, you're becoming aware of the present moment, and on the other hand, you're seeing your thoughts. When you're lost in thought, then you wake up, you come back, and you say, "Oh yes, I was thinking." And you don't throw that thought away, nor do you fondle it, and sort of indulge in it, but you see it, and then it goes away. And by bringing thoughts to awareness, especially thoughts like, "I'm frightened of that dog, it might be aggressive," and you can see it, that it's coming out of past conditioning. You begin to get free of them. And they say in the Buddhist teachings, Buddhism wasn't even really written down for the first 200 or 300, 400 years of its existence. There wasn't very much writing. There wasn't paper. And they didn't have papyrus in India. I don't know what the teachings weren't written down until about the 2nd century BCE. Started to be written down. So they're passed on orally. And when you have an oral tradition, you use lots of mnemonics to help you remember the tradition. And so the Buddhist tradition is full of numbers. So they say of these veils, these conditionings, that they fall away in 81 degrees. 81. And I just love this. Here are the degrees. Not all 81, but you'll get the gist. You say you have this fear of dogs, right? It can be strong, 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 and then you bring it to awareness and you wear it away a little bit, and it becomes strong, strong, medium, and then it becomes strong, strong, weak, and then it becomes strong, medium strong. You get it? Strong, medium, strong, medium. You get 81 somehow with that system. Yeah. So the idea is that we're waking up. That's what enlightenment really means, waking up from these dreams. When we're waking up to this beautiful, vivid world, which is so ephemeral. It's changing every second. You say, well, Milos is the same person moment to moment. But if I turn my head here, he's gone. And then he's back again. In terms of what's happening in the present moment, it's changing instant by instant. Suzuki Roshi, whom Alan knew, he was a great Buddhist teacher in San Francisco in the 1970s. One of his students, David Chadwick, wrote a biography. You know this, right? And in the beginning, in the introduction, he describes sitting with Roshi and asking a fatuous, what he thought was a fatuous question, or Roshi wouldn't answer. And he asked Roshi if he could sum up the meaning of the essence of Buddhism in just a few words. And Roshi, without batting an eye, said, everything changes. And it's changing every instant. This field that we live in, this field of awareness, is a constant flux of sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, and mental events, just like a river flowing. This is really the talk, actually. But I had something else I wanted to talk to you about with this talk. I'll just do a little more here. What's this a picture of? The sun. And Trungpa Rinpoche once did this a little differently, and he said, it's a picture of the sky. Yeah, he did it with the bird. I switched it just to trick him. Yeah, he did it with a bird. He drew a picture of a stick figure of a bird, and he said, what's this a picture of? And somebody said it's a picture of a bird, and he said it's a picture of the sky. And you see, the thing is that really the whole problem, the reason we dream, is that we've lost track of the ground of our awareness. It's a wide open space. That's when we practice this space awareness. And we become focused on the figure. It's as though we were only aware of that breath going out. And we had no awareness of the space that it was going out into. We are ignoring it. And this has been translated, this fundamental flaw in human beings. This is sort of the reverse of being awake. They call it ignorance. And you might think of it as being ignoring. We're ignoring the ground. See, the ground is the sky here. And we just see the figure, the sun. And when we do that, we walk through the world and we see constant figures. There's Alan, there's Phil, there's the cushion, there's the chair, there's the table. And we're ignoring the whole field that experience is arising out of and passing back into instant by instant. And we focus on these things and we think they actually exist ongoing, even though really that's just a thought. In terms of our experience, what we actually experience in the present moment, it's this constant arising and passing away. Nothing endures. Everything changes. So really, what the path is about is to stop ignoring the ground and begin to see the whole extraordinary field in which things are arising and passing away vividly. And as they arise and pass away, they express themselves, their qualities, the blue of a shirt, the sound of a voice, the smell of an odor. It's vivid. as it comes out of nothing and goes back into it. The word for ignorance, which is usually translated as ignorance and has been in English in the West for a long time, in Sanskrit is avidya. And what avidya means is not seeing, literally. Vidya is to see, a is not. Same thing in Tibetan. They call it ma rigpa. Rigpa is to see, ma is not. And what's not being seen? The ground. And they call this the ground, in the teachings. It's called the ground. It's called the alaya. It's another term for it in Sanskrit. They call it the ji, or the kunji in Tibetan. The ground. The ground is this space. And all we see are the figures. And we don't notice that figure is changing, is passing away, instant by instant. And that as it does, it arises and passes away, it's expressing itself so vividly. And that power of that expression is very advanced teaching. That's where you get into the whole thing of deity. Or that's another Western word. They call them yidams, expressions of wisdom, expressions of brilliance. And that's what Tantra, Vajrayana Buddhism, is full of. It's trying to draw us into this magical world where everything is arising fresh and beautiful in the present moment, and out of the world of dream, which is a trap and can lead us into terrible suffering. So it wasn't quite the talk, but it was close. It's interesting, this practice that we did, you see, we're practicing the figure and the ground. That's exactly what this practice is. The ground is this open awareness of the present space, this time, the room. And the figure is the breath going out, dissolving as it goes, just like everything else. There's Phil, and I turn my head and he's gone. Everything is dissolving as it goes. The figures into the ground, and the ground is open, it's space, it accommodates absolutely everything. And everything are the 6 knowables, by the way. Objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental events. And all of them are arising in this space, in the ground, and passing away, instant by instant. So what we're doing when we practice this way, it's a really beautiful practice. We're coming back, we're waking up. We're practicing being awake. Even if it's only imitating being awake, we're imitating it pretty well. We're imitating this wide open spatial awareness of the ground of our being. And the figure, the breath going out, or it could be, that sock in front of me, or that sensation in my leg, that's the figure. And it dissolves into the ground. And then we do it again. I'm finished. Alan, give Alan the mic. Thank you.
Just very briefly, I was just to a museum exhibit, and the artist said that when he was a child, of course, he had many playthings in his room, and a guest was visiting his parents, and this child was in the room, and he was asked, "So what is your favorite thing to do?" And
what is what?
Your favorite thing to do? And he said, "Seeing."
Interesting.
That was young Max Ernst.
Max Ernst?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Seeing.
Seeing.
So that's what the kind of extraordinary sensitivity to the richness of the world in terms of sight can spark that kind of creativity, presenting one's own personal vision of the objects that one can see. And I think that's where imagination, so it's a different view of imagination, not the kind of imagination of the dreams that you were talking about, where one uses it as an escape, but the imagination which comes from appreciation of the world as it is, as one can experience it right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or hearing, the musicians, composers. What's my favorite thing to do is listening.
Listening, yeah.
Or as John Cage might have said, listening. It's all sound is music. You create your own sounds.
Yeah.
What?
Except for the subway.
Except for the subway.
That's preachy.
Well,
Even that. I think Cage would have thought that was...
Yeah, there's no...
Huh? You would have recorded, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is excluded. Nothing is excluded, right?
Back in 1974, the Buddhist community in Boulder, Colorado, we organized... We invited a lot of teachers from different disciplines to come. Ram Dass, Richard Alpert came, and he was a big deal, but lots of people came. Oh, sorry. And one of the people who came, it was this big explosion. We had we hoped for 500 students. We got 2,000. And all kinds of people came and taught. 1974, Naropa Institute. John Cage came, and he taught that summer at Naropa. A lot of really interesting people. Gregory Bateson showed up. Lots of poets. Allen Ginsberg invited all his friends. And they were a motley crew. William Burroughs, one of the strangest human beings I ever met. Yes. Here, Mike.
I just want to clarify the words that you summarized as ground, Alia and the others. Do they translate as more closely to what is than they do to something elemental like earth or air or space?
They're not elemental. The ground in this sense is the ground of existence. It doesn't, you can't even call it the ground of existence. Because things which seem to exist, nothing exists. Nothing has any... See, the way a Buddhist would describe existence is they say, if you think that something exists, it has to be ongoing, number one, be unitary, be its own self, number two. It can't be two things. It has to be one thing. And it has to be independent, because if it depends on something else, then it's not really its own thing either. It's dependent on whatever that other thing is a part of it. And what they say is, there is no such thing. There is nothing that is ongoing, nothing that is unitary, and nothing that is independent. There's just this constant fluxing, arising, and passing away of the phenomenal world. It arises out of what seems to be silence, like this word, and dies back into it. Does that silence exist? Can you find it? No. But the sound appears and then it's gone. And so the mantra, you might say, and it's often recited in prayers, is that it goes like this: things do not exist in the way that I just described. They don't have any own being. And yet, they appear. Everything appears. They appear, and yet they do not exist. That's the mantra. And it's what allows everything to arise and pass away, and as it does, it expresses itself in the black of this sweater, whatever it is, it's black, yeah, in the sound of these words, in the smell of that flower, in the taste of that hot dog or whatever it might be, in the quality of that emotion, all these things as they arise and out of nothing, seeming nothing, that's the ground, and pass back into it, tracelessly, they express what they are. This is Tantra. This is what Tantra means. And what we're doing with our meditation practice is coming back to that, coming back out of dream. The main practice that we all have is, as we walk down the streets of our lives, is to come back, to see you're dreaming. You don't beat yourself up for it. Do not do that. Because that's another dream, and that's a subtler, worse dream. And that's the dream of self-improvement. And it doesn't work. It's just another story. Instead, you just see it. And in the instant that you see that you were dreaming, that you were lost in this thought, you're not anymore. And then you don't do a damn thing with that. It's like you respect it in that way. You're waking up.
Wouldn't you also see it differently? Like, seeing it, in the beginning, seeing it is good, but in some sense, conceptual, it's hard to describe it conceptually, but I guess you would challenge it in the sense that whether it's actually true or not. Does it actually have a shape that you thought it does? Does it actually have the color or the feelings and so forth? So
yeah,
coming back to like sort of taking it brick by brick and looking, is that a really brick?
Yeah.
And then you kind of, it seems like you'd want to do it, like you become very interested in doing it because it's just so much falsity.
Yes.
Yeah, and then
it's wonderful to discover one's own prejudices.
Yeah, so.
It really is. I'm sure we have stories in here of experiencing that. I'll just tell you a brief one from mine. I was taking a training. I function as a life coach sometimes and an executive coach, and I was taking a training. And I was in the room with a bunch of people, and there was this woman who looked about my age, and I just didn't find her attractive. You know how you do that. You look across at this person and say, well, is that somebody I want in my country club or whatever? And she just wasn't the kind of person that I thought I wanted to mix with, one way or another, the way she was dressed, the way she talked, all this. So we had to do this exercise, and we were told we were going to pair up. And the exercise is you had to identify something in your life. And this is a really interesting exercise, by the way. I've done this more than once. Something in your life that you can't be with. And something profound that you can't be with. Something maybe it goes back to your childhood. Something that has had a big effect on your life. Because in avoiding being with it, you have channeled your life in particular directions in order to avoid that. And who did I get paired up with? But her. So we sit down, and she, as far as I'm concerned, she had wearing too much jewelry, too much makeup. Her clothes are very expensive, and she just was not my cup of tea. And she says to me, she looks at me, and she's going to lead off. I forget what I told her mine was, but and she looks at me and she says, I have a little dog. And I said, yes. And she said, it's a French poodle. And I'm thinking, that fits. And she looks at me dead in the eyes and she says, Its name is Fifi. Right. You know, I mean, it's too perfect, right? And then she said, I love it very much. And she said, here's the thing I can't be with. She said, I've been married to my husband for 45 years, and we have no children. She said, when I go to a party and I don't know people, they say to me, oh, you're married. Do you have any children? And when I tell them I don't have any children, I can see the pity and the embarrassment in another woman's eyes. And she said, I hate that. I feel less than. She said, so for years and years, I've avoided going to parties where I don't know people because I just don't want to go through that. And even as I tell you now, it makes me cry, you know. And the funny thing is, we became really good friends. And I felt so grateful to her for showing me my prejudice, you know. Because in showing it to me, she freed me from it. You know, she showed me that my preconceptions about her were just that, preconceptions. And that beneath my preconceptions, or in spite of them, this was a wonderful human being. And with a lot of heart, who loved her little Fifi. Yeah, and when she told me she was Fifi, she was looking at me like, go ahead. You know, say something. So, I mean, it's marvelous to be freed from our bigotry and our preconceptions. Yeah. Alan.
That certainly is my experience also, but I also find that, alas, they only last so long, that freedom. I often experience this when I have been staffing month-long retreats, which are called datuns. And at the beginning of each retreat, you know, you see 20, 30 new people. And as you say, you immediately decide who's going to be in my club, who's not going to be in my club, right, and who you're not quite sure about. They're sort of on the waiting list. And then, you know, then you have some of those people as your meditation students, and you begin to discover more deeply who they are and to appreciate them. But meanwhile, you still have all these fantasies about everybody else. And then in the middle of this retreat, after 2 weeks, there's a day, an open day, and before the open day, there's what's called a kind of banquet or celebratory meal. And at the celebratory meal, people are invited to make an offering. You know, they could read a poem, they could do a dance, they could, you know, whatever. And so you see various people get up and just stand naked in front of everyone, you know, just exploring and revealing what's so precious to them, you know, their insights, just such bravery. And like, this is the person I decided was completely dispensable. And they're just radiating, you know? And every year, I've been back to this particular retreat for 5 years, I experience a sense of, there you go again. How could you do this again? How long will this go on? Yeah. At the end of the month, you know, you're so alive to the quirky, delicious quirkiness of so many people. And then you're back the next year and you fall into the same picking and choosing. picking and choosing. It's endless. It seems endless. These habits are so deeply ingrained, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's what a great teacher teaches, teaches us how to open. Openness is the, not stupid openness, but the willingness to be open and human. The way that woman was with me is a great gift. And it brings the world to life, and it creates love and meaning between people. And Trungpa Rinpoche, I felt, was an exemplar of that with his students and with everyone he met, even with strangers. I watched him go into a bar. I found him in a bar one time. We were in an airport and he disappeared, and we went looking for him, and I found him in a bar, and he was having this conversation with some guys and a couple of guys on either side of him, and he'd introduced himself as David Mukpo. David was his father-in-law's name. And he just loved people. It was all about openness. Yeah. When that happens, it cuts through all the prejudices. And
it said that that Rinpoche said, or about him, and I've heard this said about other teachers, that they don't give up on anyone. And particularly, it seems to me, the people who irritate the Sangha most are the people who they value most. Because if you're willing to look at your mind instead of giving in to your irritation, that could be a powerful lesson.
The Sangha means the community of...
Yeah, community of practitioners. Yeah, right. So that, the ability to see the notion of equality, that there's no difference. It's interesting, there's discrimination, how different people are from each other, but in terms of their essential humanness, there's no difference at all. And that's what we often miss. Don't you think?
You bet. Well, we ought to end. Usually we have... I also want to end this. Okay. And